Hello, and really lovely to be part of this event. I'd like to be here in person, but unfortunately I have to be somewhere else. But we thought it would be good for me to talk about the practice that I do and in relationship to some of your courses and in relationship to thinking how what I do enhances some of your learning. So I'll introduce myself, I'll do some explanations of some of the things that I've done with students from different departments, and then I'll explain a few other things, and that'll probably be all we'll have today. And I just think for now, just for this presentation, just keep your mind open and just listen, sit back and relax. And I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Matt Smith, Dr. Matt Smith. And I'm a reader in applied theatre. Now, applied theatre is about theatre that happens outside of spaces like the New Theatre Royal and big theatre spaces. I do make shows, but actually what I'm about is making theatre happen in the real world. So I go out and we work with different groups. I've done lots of work in the community, but today specifically we're looking at how applied theatre can be used to work with certain professions, particularly in healthcare and in other professions like in the forensic department and the forensic courses. And I'll talk through that in a moment, but the idea of applied theatre is theatre that is not just for actors. So I'll talk to you today about the way that you can think about that, but I'm not talking to you as wanting to turn you into an actor and make you think about taking up acting as a profession. I'm going to talk about how we do that when I'm working with other people in other courses. So first of all, to start us off, I think that gives enough information about who I am. But the first thing I want you to do is a very simple thing, and the reason I want to do this is it's interactive. So all I want you to do, and this will be just for a few seconds, and I will do this with you, is for you to close your eyes in a second and to listen to your breath. And I don't want you to change your breath. I don't want you to breathe in and breathe out really heavily. I just want you to be relaxed, but just listen to your breath and think about where your breath starts and where it finishes, and just clear your mind and take away any thoughts that are in your head. Just remove all that. Okay, if you're ready, just take a moment and close your eyes and listen to your breath. Okay, we could do that for a lot longer, but because this is a video, that probably felt like a long time anyway. So we're gonna move on. The reason I start with the breath is really for everybody in every profession and anything in life. Breath is a foundation for everything. And if you think about that, it's a very simple thing. Obviously, if we don't breathe, then we're not going to be alive. So it's kind of a fundamental thing to being a human being. But also, if you're ever in a position or you're ever in a place where you're having a difficult time, it's a stressful thing, it's something that you've got to get prepared for, or you just need to relax, you need to feel healthier, you need to feel better in yourself, always going back to the breath is really, really key. So when I'm working with students who want to be actors or performers, I often say to them, always go back to the breath. If you run out of any ideas, just spend some time breathing. It will make you feel better and it will put you in a better mood. So for your professions and the things that you're training to do in terms of your degrees and in terms of your learning, thinking about breathing can be a fundamental way of making yourself feel positive before you do something. You might need to do a presentation, you might need to do some sort of task that's part of an assessment, you might need to be ready for something. Think about your breathing, center yourself, and then you'll put yourself in a really good place. And that's something that happens all the time in the performance world and in the acting profession. So it's a fundamental thing that you can use. And when I've done this with some students, they were very, very thankful. And I said, well, what was the thing that you enjoyed the most in working with me? And I did a session with some students a while ago. And they said, oh, it was the thing about breathing. That really, really helped us. It really calmed us down and made us feel better. So just take that and take that away from this if you ever want to, and think about that. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about performance. And performance is a word that can be used in all sorts of different professions. It's not exclusive to theatre and acting and things like that. We can perform our role very, very effectively and very, very well. we can also perform our role not very well and ineffectively. So thinking about performance is okay for you in your professions. Even though you're doing a daily task and you're working with real people in real situations, some of you might be in the future, if you're doing that, performance can be a way to think through that and actually be more effective because you are assuming a role. Even in daily life, we are performing. So thinking about performance doesn't necessarily mean that you become inauthentic. It just means you put yourself in a place that makes you think differently about how you're doing your role, how you're doing things. So one thing that I do when I'm training students with these sorts of techniques is I always say, don't be afraid of performance. I'm not training you to be an actor, and you can still be authentic, but performance is something that you do to enhance what you're doing. So that can enhance your learning. So thinking about that, thinking about how you do a presentation, you might have to do a presentation with slides. If you think of your performance and you think about how you're performing, and in regards to communication, you can be much more effective. If you don't think of it as a performance, and you just mumble through your words and you look down and blah, 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 and you don't really communicate very well and you don't look at the audience, you're not thinking about being a confident presenter, that can really impede the way that your presentation is received. It can also impede the way that your work is received by the audience. And then that can actually have some detrimental effects on the effectiveness of what you do. And it could mean that you didn't get such a good mark because you didn't communicate well, because you didn't think about the performance. So in some ways, that's something you can do in all the aspects of your learning in some ways. Okay, so just to move on from the idea, the concept of performance, I just want to talk about some of the collaborations that I've done with students and with staff and different departments here. And I've got quite a list here. This is not everything, and it takes me a while to always remember because I've done a lot of collaborations around the universities, around this university in particular. Some of that work has been with the forensic department and with psychology, looking at crime scenes and using actors to play those roles in those crime scenes, and those are really, really effective. Originally, one of the first bits of collaboration I did here many years ago, about 16 years ago now, was with law students, recreating a scenario where actors were playing the perpetrators and the victims in a crime, and that went into a law court, and then it was there was a jury there, and it was played out as a scenario and filmed, and it was very, very effective, one of the first ones that I did. Then for about 5 years, we were part of this huge simulation exercise, simulating a disaster zone. So a massive humanitarian crisis. Sometimes these were earthquakes, sometimes these were floods. There were different scenarios, and they happened in different places around Portsmouth. And our students often played victims in those scenarios, but they played other kinds of roles and characters. And those bits of acting were injected into those scenarios to make them feel more exciting, to actually make people more agile, flexible, and thinking on their feet when they were doing that thing. So we would do lots of improvisational work where actors would play out roles, and it would really test people's abilities in what they were doing. We also had a film that was up for an award at the BFI some years ago, and that film was called Poor Dorothy, and that used some of our actors in it to look at scenarios, and there was a really good script written for that, to look at crime scenes and look at how you can detect and think about what happens in crime scenes. One of the ones that's very, very serious, and you can tell by the name of this scenario and this role-playing work, is we had a couple of our actors who were graduates came back, and those two students acted the roles of parents of a deceased child. So this was a child death scenario, and in those scenarios there's lots of problems around forensics, lots of problems around where the staff and the professionals from the healthcare area and then the police try to interact and be effective. And that one was really, really interesting because we were actually working with real police and real doctors and real healthcare people. And our students would help train them. So as you can see, there's a whole range of ways that you can use theatre and role play, and lots of different scenarios that this can be applicable to, and quite specifically to certain things you're doing. And next, what I'd quite like to do is just thinking about some of the techniques. I'm not going to go through a lot of it because there's not much time, and I don't really want to take up too much because you're watching a video. But one of the things that we look at when we're thinking about these role plays, and what I do actively with some of the students, because the role plays that I'm still doing and I'm working with for the last 5 years has been with the dental school. And I've been working with dental students, and in the space while they're waiting to go into a live role play with my student actors, they do techniques with me, exploring all sorts of theatre techniques that can help them think about their work as care professionals moving forward. So one thing I get them to think about when I'm doing those exercises is looking at the idea of status. In life, we play a different status. Sometimes we're very confident, sometimes we're less confident, sometimes we're just very kind of, neutral. We're not really either kind of like very confident or less confident or powerful. But the way you think about status can be really, really interesting. And what I do with the students in the session is I take out a pack of cards, and someone who's a 1 is very, very low status. Somebody who's a 10 is very, very high status. And that sort of variable, different statuses, they have to play out, and we improvise a healthcare situation. So a dental a patient and 2 healthcare professionals will come in, and they will play different statuses. They will play different cards. And that's a good way to think about how in life, if you're faced with somebody who's incredibly confident, how do you deal with them? Do you raise your status, or do you kind of like, you just stay where you are and work with what they're doing there? It kind of brings out some really interesting subtle things to think about how we interact with each other in social spaces, and those kind of those intersubjective exchanges between people, because they can be quite subtle. You can see things in that. And also, one of the things that I do with the students when I'm getting them to think about these scenarios is to think about the masks that we wear. And that might sound a little bit strange and a bit like a metaphor. But if you think about us in life, we do wear a lot of different masks. So the mask that I wear when I'm at home is pretty, invisible. Maybe it's my most revealing. It's my neutral mask. It's one that I'm kind of like just every day. But if I go into a professional situation, I may put on a different mask. And that mask might present different ways of looking. If I'm in a particular mood, or I'm presenting something that's a problem, if I'm aggressive, then that is a particular mask. It might have like a fist in that mask, or it might present a wall. And these masks we have in daily life. So to think about, if you're faced with meeting somebody from the public, or a patient, or somebody that you're dealing with, you might be seeing somebody present a particular mask. And what you kind of want to do when you're in those spaces is you want to try and see behind that mask and see what's going on. So somebody who might have what seems to be like a face that's presenting a mask like a wall, is behind that there's something else going on, and they might reveal that if you have a positive interaction and you work well with them. So that's one way of thinking around status, around masks. The other thing that I came across some years ago when I've worked with some other professional staff here in the university is this idea of stress inoculation. So going through a performance situation, gearing yourself up for a performance can be stressful. But what it can do in some ways, if you've tried that scenario out when it's not real, it's just a role play, and things go wrong, you fail, or you kind of like, you get nervous, you say the wrong thing, something weird happens, somebody says something and you're like, what's that? Or you just clam up and you can't do it. What we found with a lot of students and a lot of professionals is that's kind of a form of stress inoculation. So you've gone through the stress situation, but you've gone through that in a safe space. And then when you come to meet someone in the real world and the real space, then that changes quite a lot, and you can feel like you've been through it, you've got over that, and it will help you. For example, we had a student many years ago, and it was a really lovely little case study, really, of a student who tried to do some of the work with my student actors, really wasn't prepared, and emotionally wasn't prepared, and they got really upset, and they just couldn't do the exercise. And and we were very helpful, and we kind of like made them, know that it was okay and it wasn't a problem that they hadn't done so well. But then what happened was later on, when they actually needed to go and work with some members of the public as a patient, they said that event actually had helped give them the confidence to know that they could get over that, and that then when they came to the real thing, they could actually move forward. So some of these things kind of can help you rehearse for a better future where you can do things more effectively. So the other thing that you can think about in regards to this, and I've got a few more points before the end of the video, but it's this fancy word. It's a fancy word called proxemics. And proxemics is about how we relate to each other physically across space. So our interrelations and our relations to each other. So if I had somebody standing right next to me here, it looked quite peculiar in the video because they'd be too close. But if they're maybe a couple of meters away, it would look very, very different. If they're about a meter away from me, it would be another scenario entirely. Because the way that we relate to each other in space is really, really important. And if you think about some of the spaces that you may work in and you may look at your practices in, it's really, really important to think seriously about how far away am I from that person? Am I encroaching on their space? Am I giving them space? Am I giving them too much space? Am I presenting myself in a particular way that might make that person feel uncomfortable? And it's also reciprocal, so it comes back to you. So if that person is showing or doing things that are kind of either in your space, then what do? Well, you kind of don't square up to them and kind of like go forward towards them. You kind of move back and allow them some space in that scenario. And it's quite subtle, but when you start thinking about it within a performance terms, you can sometimes isolate that and think differently about how you interact with people in spaces. And it can be really, really effective in helping with professional ways of working with other people. The other things that we do a lot of in the scenario when I work with the dental students, and this is about 5 or 6 years now I've been doing this, is we bring students in. The students work with the dental school students. Essentially, my drama students play difficult patients and they're meeting them for the first time. And they have about 5 minutes in the scenario just to try out their first interactions and communications with a simulated patient. But while they're with me in the classroom waiting to go and do that, I do a lot of scenarios with them. And a lot of those scenarios, if you'd ask them, would be around the idea of game playing games, but live games where you interact. So they're some of them are quite fun. They often produce a lot of laughter. But there is a seriousness to that play, because in the playing out of those scenarios, you can ask questions about issues. So, for example, one of the games that I play is about helping and hindering. And you have 2 professionals coming in and working with a patient. One professional will be a helper and one will be a hinderer. And their objective is just to either help or to really, really hinder and to really, really block and make the scenario worse. And that's all they've got to focus on, and the patient is interacting with them as well. It produces a lot of laughter, but it also produces a lot of very interesting debate about, well, would that happen really in practice? A lot of people are like, oh no, it's not realistic. It doesn't have to be realistic. But those sorts of tensions between people in professions do happen, and people sometimes are not effective. So what that bit of drama does, what that little bit of game playing does, is it opens up and it expands that idea of how you can interact with another person to move forward, and it opens up that debate. So that's what we kind of do in those sessions. So really, just to sort of end this little presentation to you, and I hope it's been illuminating, and I hope you've thought a little bit differently about when you use performance, or if you use role play, or use these kind of scenarios in your work, how it can be really, really effective, and it can be fun, it can be enjoyable, but it also can bring out some other aspects that you may not have thought of. So thinking of performance in your profession or in your future profession and in your training is a really, really good thing. I work with a company called Health Action Training, and they work outside the university. They're an independent company. They work with nurses and healthcare professionals around the whole of the world, training them in thinking about person-centered care. And that company really, really successful, and they're in demand at the moment. And the thing is about that is it shows that there is a lot of interest in using this idea of performance and theatre techniques in training professionals. And if you look at the figures in the NHS about how much money they spend on professional actors each year, you'll be surprised. There's a lot of money, and there's a lot of actors who get a lot of work working for the NHS. So to finish up, I'd just like to say thank you very much for the invite, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you, and hopefully some of you I may meet in regards to working with you, thinking about using theatre techniques and thinking about performance, and having an interactive session. And just, to finish off, I really believe that using performance and theatrical techniques can really enhance your learning, and just be open-minded to it. Don't think back to the experience of when you did drama back at school, that which may not have been positive. This is not what it's about. I'm not training anyone to be actors. We're just thinking about performance being a way of enhancing professional practice. Thank you very much, and have a lovely event.